Namaskar, I'm Dr. Rama Paudel. Welcome to 10th episode of SCIPOD. SCIPOD is a talk show on Adhikari media that focuses mainly on scientific communities and policies related to science, environment and agriculture. It is an inclusive approach to driving solutions for climate change and natural disaster to improve the livelihood of people.
Global IME Bank, सबैका लागि बैंक.
In this episode, we will be discussing about Nepal's vulnerability to climate change and natural disaster. Our guest for today is Dr. Basanta Adhikari. Dr. Adhikari is the director of the Center for Disaster Studies, Institute of Engineering at Tribhuvan University, Nepal. He is also a senior fellow at the University of Melbourne and also visiting professor at Shenzhen University. Dr. Adhikari has expertise in disaster risk management, landslide, early warning system, multi-hazard risk assessment, community-based disaster risk reduction, nature-based solution and climate change. He has received numerous awards and recognition, including Young Affiliates from the World Academy of Sciences. Welcome, Dr. Adhikari.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Adhikari, you have an extensive experience in natural disaster management and climate change. So how do you see the vulnerability of natural disaster in Nepal, especially in Himalayan range?
It's very wonderful to be here. So let me correct in the beginning, we don't call natural disasters because disasters are not natural. So this is the new term that we are using because hazard might be natural. For example, landslide that might happen in the forest, but when it affects the population and then the population needs external assistance to recover from that, that's called disaster. So that's why we don't say natural disasters. So in terms of Himalayas, first we need to understand about the origin of the Himalayas because this is very young mountain. So seismic activities are there. So we are receiving numerous earthquakes in our recent history, and then the strong Asian monsoon due to different climatic conditions. So the coupling effect of these seismotectonic activities and then the Asian monsoon, along with the anthropogenic activities, what we are practicing in these Himalayas, also in the Nepal Himalaya, which is the central part of the Himalayas of 2,400 kilometer arch. So these natural events, actually these triggered the hazards which creates the vulnerability, which impose the vulnerability, which increase the vulnerability to the people who are living in this part of the world. So that's why in changing context of the climate change, when the temperature is rising, our glaciers are melting, the number of forest fires are increasing, the flood events are increasing, climate extremes are there. So that's why people are being exposed to the new change or the new kind of scenario where the vulnerability is increasing. So, but by saying that, I'm not blaming only the natural phenomenon. We people are also creating the vulnerability, increasing vulnerability. For example, we are living nearby the riverside. That increases the vulnerability. It's not from the flood, it's from our activities because we are building our houses there and we are not actually receiving on a good way about the risks. So the risk perception is different, risk tolerance is very high, and there are many residual risks in this part of the world. So that's why due to different events and conditions, the vulnerability is increasing in this part.
As you mentioned, there are also anthropogenic and natural factors to disasters. What are the major disasters in Nepal and that is affecting the livelihood and the infrastructure development in Nepal?
So in disaster field, what we always saying that Nepal is a shopping center of disasters.
Yeah.
So we have all disaster except we didn't have tsunami, we didn't have volcano. So we have all other kind of, we didn't have sea, of course. So the major the disasters in Nepal, especially the first is always earthquake, landslide, flood, forest fire, glacial lake outburst flood, heat wave, cold wave, drought, which is very slow onset of disasters. These hazards are being turned to the disasters, and that affects the vulnerability and the livelihood of the people. For example, if you talk about the agriculture country of Nepal, so all the agricultural land lies in the foothill of the Himalayas, in the flat land. They are being destroyed by the reoccurrence in flooding events in the Himalayas, because the sediments are being generated in the high hill, that being transported by the river and deposited, and then it increases the river bed and creates the flooding problem. So that's why the livelihood is very, very challenging in terms of natural hazards and disasters.
You already said there are some anthropogenic activities. Are there any mechanism that we can diagnose the problems and then to work for its solution, or is it due to climate change or due to other factors?
Yeah, I mean, this is the crux of the problem of this, if you talk about disaster scenarios in Nepal. So when you try to find about the vulnerability, why people are more vulnerable. So there is a direct relationship between disaster and poverty. So the poverty is the main thing. Another one is that the risk perception, what I already explained, because there is a term, I always use this term, ke garne, what to do. Because if people do not have alternative, then they are exposed to the risks. And another one, people don't want to move from that place to another place, because they are practicing or they are living there because of this livelihood. They know that there might be a landslide, but they don't have to go anywhere. The government government is not providing any support. And another way, if you look, they don't know the risks also, because of lack of scientific research in this part, right? That's why we always talk about the science-based decision-making process in the planning and others. So that's why people are very fatalistic. They believe on God, not the nature. They don't believe in science. So there are many predisposing factors or underlying causes that creating or increasing the vulnerability. We can easily diagnose these things.
Do we have any examples for that, as you are also working on early warning systems, right? So like, are there any examples that we predict that landslides, floods is coming, or in technology that we can have already in place, and so that the communities are aware about it, or the government work on that?
No, absolutely. There are many approaches. For example, if you look the flood early warning system, Nepal has done fantastic job. If you look the death of people due to flood in 10 years time, the number is significantly reduced because of the flood early warning. Landslide, we are working on that. Landslide is not easy like flood. It's a very difficult to predict early warning, but there are two types of early warning. One is rainfall based threshold prediction, another is local early warning system. My research group is working on that. So earthquake, we have been trying to do that based on the seismometer that the government of Nepal has installed, but we need more dense network for the prediction. And earthquake early warning is always difficult. And then other glacial lake outburst flood, for example, in the Himalayas, in the high altitude, it's very costly. We don't have good monitoring systems, because for the prediction, for the forecasting or early warning, you need a monitoring. And this monitoring, you have to install the monitoring instrument in the field. We can do it from the satellite as well, but the accuracy is not that high, because if you predict based on only satellite, false alarm might be there, right? So that's why we have to have a ground monitoring stations. And if you look on these high impact hazards, the source is or are above 3,000 meters, and we didn't have good monitoring stations.
As a public, I never knew, except the monsoon weather prediction, early warning weather prediction, I don't really hear about that flood or any other landslide prediction in Nepal. Which organization is responsible and how it is working?
Yeah, I mean, if you look the government structure of government of Nepal, so weather prediction and the flood forecasting depends upon the Department of Hydrology and Meteorology. For landslide and earthquake is Department of Mines and Geology. And there is an irrigation department also. They work on some kind of research on that. So, but these organizations are not working together. right? They are working in silos. So that's why government of Nepal formed National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority. So the main task of that authority is to coordinate between the organization or the department or the ministries within the government structure, along with the private sector, academia, development partners, and other agencies, right? So they are working, of course. I know that, I mean, we all know that the capacity is not that high, but whatever the capacity they have, they are working on that and doing some predictive modeling.
As you mentioned, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority, it seems like it's under the federal government, right?
It's a federal government.
So we have now a three-tier of government systems. Yes. We have a provincial government and the local government. So especially the livelihood of people, the local government is directly connected to those peoples. How these agencies are working with all these 3 tiers of government to mitigate the disaster risks in Nepal?
So if you look the constitution of Nepal, so the disaster management solely falls under the jurisdiction of the local government.
Okay.
And if you look NDRRMA Act 2017, it clearly mentioned about the role of local government. Okay, so to understand that, you have to talk about or understand or visualize about the structure, how disaster management is being conducted here in Nepal. So we have a Prime Minister office,
yes,
and within the Prime Minister there are many other ministries. So within the Home Ministry there is a National Emergency Operations Center, and we have a Provincial Emergency Operations Centers. We have a district DEOC that call, and we have a LEOC, Local Emergency Operations Center, right? So the NDRM, the role of the NDRM is to coordinate that one. Okay, so for that, as we all know that local government, they don't have that much capacity to handle all kind of hazards in their own region.
Yes.
They don't have data. They don't have better understanding about what kind of hazards might happen there. They don't know about the vulnerability. They don't have the all household vulnerability level information, and they don't have the sufficient hardware facilities. For example, office infrastructures and the display system, computerized monitoring system, or internet connection, something like that. Though Government of Nepal, NDRRMA, has started the BIPAD portal, that is the one flagship program, where the local government has to upload all the data, and they can download or access this data for their own benefit, right? But we don't have sufficient human resources in the local government.
What should the government need to do to fulfill this gap so that the people in local communities might be benefited from all these technologies and the research innovation that we are having in these sectors?
Yeah, so I can talk categorically on that. So first, we need a scientific evidence.
Yes.
So the government has to involve universities for research in different fields, right? So they can provide the map, analysis, graphs, chart, predictive models, so on. So based on that, the government has to make a plan to implement to the ground. So there's the one step. The second one is that the local government and the provincial government, they have to have a not sufficient but necessary equipment to analyze or to display this data in their own premises up to the local government. Third one is that the awareness. That is very important. For example, what happened in this after the monsoon, because people died, government predicted already. Department of Hydrology and Meteorology predicted there would be the rain, but people did not care because the awareness about the hazard is very, very low. So that's why the awareness among the people in the community. So you have to go to the grassroots. Like we have to go to the ward level, and there is in the act is a provision that you have to develop the disaster management committee within the ward level. That's called WDMC, right? And then there are communities, right, in different women groups, or what we call in Nepal, that's called Ama Samoa, mothers group or something like that. So, or marginalized people, we have to bring them to the mainstream of disaster risk management, including integrating this ZC perspective and others. So that's why if you make the comprehensive plan with this awareness, technical details, functionality, where it comes onto the good governance for the disaster management. So, but in this political system, in the democratic system, for example, some power, some kind of government, political party in the federal and in the local level, different political party, there is a very gap in coordination and collaboration, both in horizontally.
I just wanted to know, as you are from Institute of Engineering and you are also director for the disaster
Yes, right.
management, how are you working with those governments? Do you have any examples that you are connecting your work to the governance level and the people's level and local government, or how do you just translating your work and the policy documents at national government? How are you working on that?
So there are two aspects what I can explain. One is that on academic level. For example, the Institute of Engineering, we have campuses in Dharan, we have a campus in Pokhara, and we have campus here in Kathmandu and also in Chittagong. So these are all the campuses. They communicate with the local government and provincial government where necessary. So Institute of Engineering is always an advising body, informal advisory body for the government. So that's why when the government needs, we deliver and we coordinate on a federal level, provincial level, and the local government level. Another way, when you do the project, some kind of engineering projects or disaster risk reduction project or management project, we involve our local government. For example, we have just conducted 5 years project funded by UKRI, and we did a work in Valubang.
What is about that?
It's all about future city. It's called Tomorrow Cities. What would be the tomorrow city, right? So we went there, and there is a Provincial Infrastructure Development Authority. It's called PIDA, and there is a there are many local government. So we involved them during the process. So that's why they gave us the information. We analyzed the data scientifically, and we prepared the map or the all required material, and we provided to them. So now they will implement that one. So that's how we on a project level we involve the local government. But as being a university professor or the center, we always do our research work to identify the new innovative technologies for disaster risk reduction, but we work based on their request as well. For example, any municipalities of 753 in Nepal, they can reach out to us if they need some kind of support, because we have the government university. It's our responsibility to do work for them, right? So they can approach to us and we work for them.
It's great to hear about it, that we can provide services to the government, but from my experience, I just wanted to ask you, do we have enough resources to support even the advisory support to the governance in Nepal?
I cannot comment on others, capacity, but as an Institute of Engineering, we do have human resources. If you have a better plan and better projects, and money is not an issue, in my point of view, because there are many development partners here in Nepal. They are really interested to support the government of Nepal, especially in the field of disaster risk reduction, and they are supporting us, and they are providing grants and loans and others. So it's only matter that how you communicate your approach to the funding agencies. So within the university, to do a fundamental research is a problem. I know that. We don't have sufficient fund within the country. For the implementing projects like others, what I already explained, I think money is there, funding is there. We can reach out to them. But if you talk about the fundamental scientific research, we didn't have sufficient resource on that. So, but up to now, especially what I'm doing is that I always work with the international collaboration. So that's how we approach or we apply, and that's how we're getting the funds.
Yeah, I see your involvement even within other international universities and international partners. So it's are you maintaining it in personal level, or do you have institutional support? How are you managing it, and what is your current research priorities and how it's supporting in disaster risk reduction in Nepal?
So as being a university professor, I'm free to do a research and international collaboration. So if I do international collaboration, let's say working on my field, so I'm always representing my institute. There is even though I'm working single, for example, in some project, the university is always there because I belong to the university. That's the personal level, right? Although university is there. But on an institutional level, we always have a memorandum of understanding, MOU, right? So, for example, I'm working with Chinese colleagues, I'm working with European colleagues, Australian, Americans. We are working a couple of projects in Nepal, and we have MOUs with different universities where we can bring the experts and we can send our faculty and students to their own universities, right? So, it's an academic exchange, knowledge exchange, and the execution level. So, that's why the maintain the networking, you have to have a good scientific understanding, and you have to have a good scientific publication in international arena. And if you have that, then the international scientists believe on you and they will approach to you, and that's how you can sustain your network and maintain your network to do the fundamental science what is needed for the country.
What I wanted to relate is we are having some of the groundbreaking resources and work as well, but still there seems lots of problem going around. We are not being able to reduce the risks, as I told. We are even lots of infrastructure, we design it, we implement it, and then floods comes, landslide comes, and we lost it, right? So even on that perspective, like how the disaster people, scientists in disaster areas are working, and how their work is translating in local level. I just wanted to know from your personal experience, with some examples of how some of your projects and research work being translated in the ground level. So can you please share on
Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples on that. So we did a very fantastic research back in 2016 when the glacial lake was burst in Tibetan part of China, and then on that time we were doing the earthquake science research in the Himalayas, and then we installed the broadband seismometer, and then the glacial lake outburst flood happened, and it detected from our broadband seismometer, which was not installed in the river, which was away from the river, and it accurately recorded, and that was the groundbreaking research, that you don't need instrument that has to be there in the river, because in the during the flooding time this flood might destroy this instrument for monitoring, right? So you can install that not only the river bed but little bit far from that, so that you will not lose your instrument. And that is the first time that our research detected the physical flood modeling in the field, and that's what we published in Science in 2018. So, for example, this is really good for transboundary research, transboundary early warning system. If we install nearby our boundary between China and Nepal, if something happen or glacial lake outburst flood or flood in China, then our instrument detect that before that flood arrives. But nobody is interested to use that technology here in the Nepal. I mean the government. This is one of the worst example. The good example is that I did one very fantastic research on landslide early warning system, that we developed the system, very low cost, low tech, community can maintain that. So my research group, we developed that, and we installed that, and it worked in Dolakha, and it worked perfectly, and people were really interested to replicate that to other places.
So in some municipality?
Yes, in municipalities.
Which area it was?
So in Sundravati area in Dolakha. Now we have been utilizing that in Nilkantha of Dading, and then in Lalitpur district as well. So people are being very interested to install such kind of system. That is a very good example that how our scientific research that is very low cost, low tech, can be implemented into the field. You know, so there are both ways. The only thing is that in my own experience working in this field for many decades, what I found that or what I find is that the government is really not interested to adopt the scientific findings for their planning and process, and that is the major barrier between the scientist and then the government. So in that case, we are also, as a scientist, we are also, I blame myself. I mean, I'm always happy publishing paper in science as academics, but the government people said, oh, these scientists, they do their own fundamental research, this and that, but they never communicate. So it's all about risk communication, how you communicate your finding to the policymakers, planners, member of parliaments, and other responsible persons. That is the most dire need for this country, that the risk communication from the what we call the dissemination of scientific investigation to the local communities or the policymakers.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I wanted to have some dissemination from this show as well. Because like even though we publish in many renowned journal or publication, if that does not translate in our policy document, as we already explained how vulnerable we are to the climate change, to the disaster, and so how much we can work on this field in a ground level that will save many lives and the livelihood of people. And coming to your research and innovation on these things, actually like when we talk about the disaster, mostly as you already mentioned, the marginalized people, poor people, women are mostly vulnerable to it, and especially even their voices are often unheard in many instances. People are migrating due to those disasters from many fields. To solve these issues in a holistic manner, what should we do as scientists together, and how the policymakers and the government can work?
Thanks for a very fantastic question. I really love that. So, why we are doing science? Why are we doing scientific investigation and research? It's for people. So you have to include people during this investigation or the scientific research. Not on a scientific level if you don't have, but when you are going there, people are living there for the centuries. Like they know more than you. You are the scientist, of course you can run the models and everything, but the people know. So you have to talk on that way. So how to reduce the risks in the scientific arena? So participation, what is rightly says, the women participation, the marginalized people participation in disaster risk reduction or disaster risk financing. So participation is increasing nowadays, right? So we are being able to include those people in discussion. But the most important thing is not only the participation. The important thing is meaningful participation. How much their voices are being heard, are being documented, are being recorded into the planning. Because after all, these people are the most vulnerable, right? Because of the lack of coping capacity or inadequate coping capacity.
If I look at the agriculture sector, it's like $1 million loss in one events or one day events, and they are farmers, they are marginalized people. Like we do have lots of activities, programs, talks about the climate change, its vulnerability, but like going back to the field level, the problem is still severe and they don't really have a mitigation measure on it. So I just wanted to bring all those ideas to how could we bring that to the grassroots level so that the target people might be benefited, or due to all this loss, as we talk about, these are the transpounder issues. They are even victimized for those they haven't done anything like that, right? So how could we contribute on that?
Okay, on a planning level, what you can do, we can prepare the risk sensitive land use planning. So based on the high, medium, low risks, the local government can issue the permit whether you are allowed to build your house or not. If there is high risk, then you are not allowed to do that. It's a medium risk with some mitigation measures. Low, that's fine. That can be connected to the insurance, right? So if you have a good insurance or if you have an insurance plan, then you can get the the money out of that if something happened. So that's called disaster insurance or the risk insurance, what we call the risk transfer, right? Risk transfer. Another one is what the main agenda now is that disaster risk financing. How much money do you need?
Yes.
To mitigate these risks or reduction of these risks due to this unprecedented events like climate change and other. What we are talking about, the big in arena is called loss and damage fund, and it's just formed in Samal right? And then in this COP also they are talking about, and if you look on the disaster risk financing, people are talking about $1.3 trillion, and this government were only providing $300 billion or so, right? So the government or the countries like Nepal, which has a very little contribution for climate change, and we are being victimized from these industrial states or in the developed countries which are more generating these or contributing for the climate change. So that's why if you look on the from the top to the bottom perspective, the most important thing is that the risk understanding, risk documentation, and how can you do the risk financing mechanism for the betterment of the people's livelihood in this country.
As you mentioned, we recently have a COP26, right? So like, what were the advantage for Nepal and the Nepalese people?
If you see government perspective, government of Nepal is always leading the mountainous countries, so we are very good on that. So this time our president addressed COP in Baku. But in terms of loss and damage, people talked. In terms of risk financing, they talked, because we developing countries like Nepal, we are expecting some compensation fund or the money from them, but the methodology or the procedure is not being developed, and they are only talking about supporting, but there is no any clear procedure that how can we get that money. That's the international level. But what government is not doing properly is that you have to have a scientific calculation of loss and damage in a quantitative way. Also there are many qualitative, but if you don't have the scientific understanding or the scientific calculation of this quantitative loss and damage, you cannot go and talk in front of other in the international arena, and they don't believe on that.
I just wanted to come to this point. Even in the climate diplomacy, climate change diplomacy, or diplomacy in all those transboundary issues, we people from developing countries often face that we don't have enough evidence for that. We don't have enough resource on that. So how do you see perspective that how could we advance on collecting those evidences on research in these transboundary issues like climate change, disaster management, all these issues? How do you see the future perspective on these issues so that we can raise our voices loudly in a scientific way with evidences? What should we do on that?
Yeah, first you have to clearly tell to the international communities that this happened, these events are due to climate change. You have to prove that. For example,
you work in glaciers, burst, and we do have even 50 glaciers.
Now there are many. There are many
about to burst, sir.
Yeah, there are many glaciers which are very potentially dangerous. Lake in the Himalaya, in the Nepal Himalaya, along with the other parts. For example, we had a Thame glacial lake outburst flood. It was purely due to the temperature increase. Very small lake burst, and then see the huge devastation and loss in Thame area, right? Not only that, for example, if you look the Birendra Tal, that the glacial detached from that surface and fell to the lake, and it created the source and water to the downstream, right? Because the glacier detached because of the temperature increase. So you have to prove that. Okay, these are the due to the temperature increase in the Himalayas, and then you have to calculate quantitatively what was the loss, what was the damage, and what can be the future scenarios and predictive model. If you do that based on the ground research, field work.
Are we doing it, or do we have any examples of doing that and raising our voice internationally? Or?
In academic research there are, and government is trying to do some. For example, Thame and Milamchi, for example, they are trying to do, and there are some studies also, but these are not sufficient, because Nepal is being victimized in many ways, in many areas, not only by the glacial lake, also from the extreme event. That extreme event happened in Dodara, that more than 600 millimeter in 24 hours. This was a record break rainfall. Why this is happening? This is all due to the climate extremes that we need to prove.
So coming to this point, like how could we contribute to the climate justice to the more vulnerable people, who are victimized due to those climate events, and even in future as well, one event can lead to several spheres of poverty, marginalization, everything. So like how could these loss and damage from climate justice, climate financing go directly to the people, how the government can work and how the scientists like you and like us can facilitate on those initiatives.
The good part, what we need to have is a good governance. Even if you have a money, if you do not have the governance or government structures to implement that project, it's no value. If you look some of the fund that we have received, and if you go under the ground level, how these are functioning, right? So you have to have a first good governance and the government structure. The second one is that how we can implement to the grassroots level, like for the climate justice, because the farmers, poor people, marginalized people, they are being victimized due to this climate extremes. How could you compensate that one?
Yeah.
So how many losses are there? Because losses is not only in the tangible way, there are many intangible losses also.
Yeah.
Like how can we document that? How can we relate with in climate justice? How the farmer in the very far hinterland of the Himalayas can get money or compensation from the climate fund? That's the most important, right?
Yeah.
Because these farmers, these people or these marginalized people, they don't have access to the international level. The government of Nepal has to develop some kind of system that can be translated this fund or transfer this fund to improve their livelihood, to improve their capacity for the reduction of the vulnerability, and then we can only talk about the climate justice. Otherwise, if you talk only staying in Kathmandu and doing nothing, going to the international arena.
I work in Bhairahava, and when I come to Kathmandu, I see lots of talks, dialogues, interaction going on all these issues. But people are more, as we in our informal talk, we talk about accept the risks of lives. We have everything in Nepal, right?
Yeah.
So like people have risks for their lives, their livelihood. Like they're suffering, and it's very vulnerable. But our efforts are not being translated to the ground level. That's my concern. How could we capacitate those local government, local systems, so that people they are entitled to get those funds, right? Because it's their justice.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's why I mentioned that we need a evidence-based, science-based decision-making process, right? So if you don't have a scientific evidence, your plan will not work into the field. But one thing which I want to comment on that, we need a dialogue, we need a seminar, we need a workshop to discuss about more things. And of course, being a capital city, it happens here. But the most important thing is that how can we implement such discussion, the outcome of this discussion to the ground level. That's the important, right? So that's why we have to capacitate our local government. We have to capacitate our scientists. We have to capacitate our engineers at the ground level. We have to capacitate our technocrats and bureaucrats to understand about the basic aspect of the disaster aspect, so that they can allocate fund or budget for disaster risk reduction in their own municipalities and periphery.
Okay, we're coming to the end. What would be your message to the policymaker in government levels, or the peoples in local government, provincial government, or in federal government to better prepare for the disaster risk reduction and the climate change vulnerability in Nepal?
Okay, so I conclude with some of the points on that. The first, the scientists or the university professors or the researchers should work on the ground to gather the basic fundamental evidences for different predictive models and others for early warning and another. The second one is that the policymakers should listen to the scientists what they are developing.
Yeah.
And third steps, they have to translate that scientific evidences for the policy making. The fourth one is that we have to capacitate the local government. The fifth, which is very important, we have to develop the risk financing while creating the awareness on disaster risk reduction and management in this country from federal level to the local level.
Yes, this sector is really important in case of Nepal, and we need to keep having a dialogue in multi-layers. And I really appreciate your efforts coming in SCIPOD and contributing in this conversation. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Paudel, for inviting me here to share my experiences and my opinion on that. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.